At 6:45 in the morning, I woke to a sound that didn't belong, the sound of absence. My wheelchair wasn't where it should have been. The corner by my dresser was empty, a hollow space staring back at me like an accusation. For a moment I thought maybe David moved it again. But then I saw it, that faint mark on the floor where the wheels used to rest, dust disturbed in perfect circles. And in that instant, I knew something wasn't right. I called out, "Tracy?" Silence. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator answered me. You don't need shouting to feel betrayal. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in what's missing. I tried to breathe steady, to keep my heart from racing, but the air felt heavier than usual, thick with something I couldn't name yet. My mind began to rewind the hours before, every look, every pause, every smile that wasn't quite true. Last night she'd said, "Mother Wheeler, let's make sure tomorrow's perfect." Now the perfection had begun with my disappearance. But before I tell you what happened next, the humiliation, the fall, and how Grace decided to fight back, you need to understand who I was before that morning. My name is Martha Wheeler, 72 years old, retired school principal, widow of a man whose kindness could soften storms. I live with my son David and his wife Tracy. After my hip injury, they insisted I move in. "It's safer here, Ma," David said. I believed him. Safety sounded nice back then. Every morning I followed a ritual, tea first, a prayer second, then a quiet talk with Walter's picture on the windowsill. I'd whisper, "Good morning, old man. Still keeping an eye on me?" He always smiled back, frozen in that photograph, as if saying, "You're doing just fine, Martha." That morning, sunlight poured through the curtains, too bright for the kind of day it would become. I remember how it painted the wooden floor, golden and gentle, completely unaware that cruelty had already found its place in the house. Tracy moved around downstairs, her heels clicking like applause meant for herself. She had a way of making busyness look like virtue. From the first day I moved in, she treated kindness like currency, spent only when guests were watching. Still, I tried to believe she cared. I told myself her tension came from exhaustion, not resentment. But I'd felt her eyes linger too long on my chair, as if it offended the beauty she'd curated. People talk about intuition as a whisper. Mine was a bell ringing in my bones that morning. I adjusted my blouse, brushed my curls, and sprayed Walter's favourite perfume. Just a dab, soft enough to make me feel seen. I looked in the mirror and said to my reflection, "You've survived worse, girl. Today's just another day." But it wasn't. Because somewhere in that same house, my daughter-in-law was preparing for her grand birthday dinner, a night meant to celebrate her grace, her charm, her perfection. And she'd decided that I didn't belong in that picture. She didn't need to say the words. Hiding my chair said it for her. I sat there for a long time, hands folded, heart steadying, not angry, just awake. And as I waited for someone to remember me, a quiet promise formed in my chest. I wasn't going to beg to be seen. I was going to let truth do the walking for me. And by the time that night ended, it would walk straight into the light, right where Grace was waiting. By noon, the house had turned into a stage again. The clatter of dishes, the scent of roasted chicken, the rustle of gift bags, all of it rehearsed noise meant to convince the world we were a happy family. Tracy's voice floated up from the kitchen, crisp and efficient. "Keep the centerpiece lower, we need symmetry." She talked to the caterer the way a conductor scolds her violins. Every note perfect, no emotion allowed. I sat by my mirror, brushing my curls until they framed my face the way Walter used to like. 72 years old, but I still believe neatness is respect, for yourself and for the day God gave you. The mirror caught the light just right. For a second, I looked less like an old woman and more like memory itself. Then came the knock. Come in, I said. Tracy slipped inside, perfume first, smile second. Just checking on you, Mother Wheeler. Her tone could butter bread and slice it in the same breath. I'm fine, I said, keeping my voice warm but steady. She glanced at the corner, the empty corner where my wheelchair should have been that morning. Her eyes flickered, quick and guilty, then she recovered. Lovely day, isn't it? The guests will start arriving around 6. Indeed, I said. I imagine it'll be beautiful. Oh, it will be, she replied. I've worked hard to make it perfect. I even thought maybe tonight you could use one of the dining chairs. For the pictures, you know. Everything will look uniform. There it was again. That word. Perfect. The cage wrapped in velvet. I met her gaze in the mirror. Uniform isn't always beautiful, Tracy. Sometimes difference is what makes things worth looking at. She laughed softly, but her reflection wouldn't meet mine. Of course, of course. I just want everyone comfortable. Don't worry, I said. I'll make sure they are. She lingered a moment longer, then left with the faint click of heels that always sounded like punctuation marks. Sharp, final, rehearsed. After she was gone, I sat there in the quiet, letting the truth settle. It wasn't just about the chair. It was about control. About making the house hers alone. I'd seen women like her all my life, terrified of imperfection, blind to kindness. I almost pitied her. Almost. Around 2, David came in, loosening his tie. Hey, Ma, he said, leaning against the doorframe. You ready for tonight? As ready as I'll ever be, I answered. She's been running around since dawn, he said with a grin. You know how she gets. I do, I said quietly. Don't forget to breathe between her expectations. He laughed, kissed my forehead and left again. The sound of his footsteps faded down the hall, and I whispered, You still don't see, do you, son? But one day you will. By late afternoon, the sun began to lower itself over the neighborhood, washing the room in gold. I wheeled to the window. Yes, I found another chair, an old office one with arms stiff as honesty, and stared out at the garden. The roses were opening wide, shameless in their beauty. I envied their freedom. I thought of Walter, of how he'd tell me, Martha, don't fight small minds, outgrow them. That voice still steadied me more than any railing could. At 5, the first cars began pulling up outside, laughter carried from the porch, clinking glass, the start of a night meant to sparkle. I adjusted my lavender blouse, pinned my brooch, and said to my reflection, Dignity's the only jewelry they can't steal. I knew what was waiting downstairs. The lights, the laughter, the missing chair. I also knew something Tracy didn't. You can't erase presence, you can only delay it. So I whispered a small prayer, not for revenge, but for revelation. Lord, let the truth arrive tonight, gently if possible, loudly if necessary. Then I straightened my blouse, lifted my chin, and smiled at the woman in the mirror. She looked ready, and the light behind her looked like it was holding its breath. The railing was cold beneath my fingers as I made my way down. The sound of laughter grew clearer, glasses clinking, people greeting one another, the sound of polite joy. And then I saw them. From halfway down the staircase, I could see the glow of the dining room, candles flickering across the polished table, crystal glasses lined in rows, and Tracy in the centre of it all, radiant in her red gown. She looked every bit the woman she wanted the world to see, charming, graceful, untouchable. David stood beside her, smiling, proud. My son, my heart walking around in a man's body, didn't see the emptiness at the top of the stairs. I stayed there for a moment, hidden in the shadows, watching them, and I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not even sadness, just distance, the kind that makes you finally see people clearly. Tracy's laughter rang through the room, light and perfect, but the perfection was brittle, like glass. Then someone noticed me. "Oh, Mrs. Wheeler," a guest gasped. "You're here!" The chatter dimmed. Heads turned. I could feel a dozen eyes climb the staircase toward me. Pity from some, discomfort from others. Tracy's smile faltered. Just slightly, but enough for me to see the panic behind her poise. "Mother Wheeler," she said, her voice too bright. "We were just about to come get you." "Were you, dear?" I smiled, steady and small. "That's kind of you," I said. "I didn't want to miss your night." David hurried toward the stairs, concern flashing across his face. "Mom, you should have called me." "I did," I said gently. "But I suppose the music was louder than my voice tonight." The guests chuckled politely, but a few eyes lowered, embarrassed. Tracy moved toward me, her composure cracking at the edges. "Come, let's get you seated. We saved you a lovely spot by the window." I nodded. How thoughtful. As David helped me to a chair, I caught my reflection in the glass of a picture frame. My face calm, unshaken, almost regal. For the first time in years, I looked like the woman I used to be, the principal who could silence a room without raising her voice. Tracy hovered beside me, pretending to adjust the napkins. Her perfume filled the air, sweet, heavy, suffocating. I leaned slightly toward her and whispered, just loud enough for her alone. "You can hide a chair, dear, but not a conscience." Her hand froze mid-motion. She didn't answer. She just smiled that brittle hostess smile again and turned back to the table. The music started up once more, conversation resumed, and the night continued, at least for them. But I knew the evening had already shifted. I could feel it in the way David glanced at me more often, confused by something he couldn't name. I could feel it in the way Tracy avoided my eyes, her laughter too bright, her posture too stiff. And I could feel it in my bones, the quiet certainty that Grace had already stepped into the room. It didn't need lightning, it didn't need witnesses, it just needed time. And by the time the last candle burned low, the truth would stand in full light. Not through my words, but through her fall. Between courses, people tried polite conversation. "Mrs. Wheeler," one woman asked, "you must be proud of your son." "I am," I said. "He has his father's heart." I paused, then added, "And his wife has his ambition." They laughed lightly, unsure if it was a compliment. Tracy's fork froze for half a second before she forced another smile. Every sound around me felt magnified, the scrape of cutlery, the clink of glass, the whisper of silk when she moved. Each small noise built toward something unseen. I could feel the moment forming, like thunder gathering before rain. Halfway through dessert, I leaned toward her and said softly, "You've done beautifully tonight." Her face brightened in surprise. "Thank you, Mother Wheeler." I nodded. "Everything looks flawless." Then I lowered my voice. "But tell me, dear, does it feel that way?" She blinked, unsure. I'm not sure what you mean." I smiled gently, just wondering if the inside of perfection ever gets lonely. Her lips parted, but no sound came. For a heartbeat, she looked human, uncertain, even fragile. Then the mask returned. "I think everything is wonderful," she said briskly. I leaned back. "I'm sure it is." David, catching none of it, began telling a story about his work, his voice loud, cheerful, oblivious. Guests laughed on cue. But beneath the laughter I heard it again, that faint tremor of truth waiting to be heard. When Tracy lifted her glass for a toast, her hand shook ever so slightly. "Thank you all for coming," she said, voice bright. "It means so much to celebrate surrounded by family." Her eyes flicked to me, just for a second, before she looked away. Family. The word landed between us like something sacred and broken all at once. As the guests echoed cheers, I stayed quiet. Instead, I looked around the table and thought, God, you're not done yet, are you? The evening blurred on. Music resumed, laughter resurfaced, and the room filled with warmth that wasn't real. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was watching the story unfold, the way a teacher watches a lesson take shape, knowing the answer, waiting for the student to see it themselves. Near the end of dinner, Tracy passed behind me, touching my shoulder lightly. Her voice dipped low. Thank you for coming down, Mother Wheeler. I looked up at her, calm, unmoved. Thank you for leaving me a way to rise. Her brow furrowed. I don't... You will, I said. She blinked, confused, then turned away as another guest called her name. And right there, between the laughter and the candles, between the lies and the lace, I felt it. That quiet shift in the air when truth decides it's done waiting. I didn't know what form it would take or how it would arrive, but I knew one thing for certain. By the time the last toast was raised, the performance would end, and the curtain would fall, not on me, but on her. The moment for the toast came like a drumbeat you can feel before you hear. Glasses were refilled, chairs straightened, the chatter softened into expectation. Everyone waited for Tracy's next performance. She stood, smiling, elegant, polished, the perfect hostess one last time. Her red gown shimmered under the chandelier as if it were lit from within. For a second, even I forgot the morning. Even I forgot the empty corner upstairs. Before we close this evening, she began, I just want to thank everyone who helped make tonight so special. Family, friends, you've all made me feel seen, celebrated, and loved. She paused, the way practiced speakers do, waiting for applause. And she got it. When the room quieted, she continued, There's someone here who deserves a special mention. She turned her head toward me, smile precise. Mother Wheeler, she said, you've been such a strong presence in our lives. We're grateful to have you with us. Her tone was smooth, almost gentle. But every word carried the sting of performance, not love. I nodded slightly, feeling dozens of eyes shift toward me. Let's raise a glass, she said, lifting hers, to family, for teaching us patience, grace, and forgiveness. The irony almost made me laugh. Everyone echoed, to family. Glasses clinked, voices rose, and in that sound I heard it. The exact moment her mask cracked. A guest sitting near the end of the table whispered too loudly, I didn't know you used to teach, Mrs. Wheeler. You must be proud of your daughter-in-law hosting such a lovely dinner. Before I could respond, another voice, older, softer, said, She's amazing, considering her condition. The word hung there. Condition. Tracy froze. Her smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face. Condition, she repeated. The older woman blinked. Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't David tell you? I was asking how your hip's been hurt. Ealing, Mrs. Wheeler. The room went quiet. Every eye turned to me again. I smiled politely. Better, thank you, though I do rely on my wheelchair for balance. Someone muttered, I didn't see one upstairs. Another whispered, Oh, maybe it was moved for space. The whispers spread like a slow tide, and I sat still, letting it come. Tracy's face turned pale beneath her foundation. She laughed awkwardly. Oh, yes, of course. We stored it in the spare room for tonight, to make more space for guests. I tilted my head. Oh, is that where it went? I was wondering. The silence was delicate, thin as glass. Then, a soft clink. Someone put their glass down too hard. The smallest sound, but it cracked the moment open. David frowned. Wait, Tracy, you moved it? Her eyes darted toward him. I just thought... Without telling her, he asked quietly. She laughed again, brittle, too high-pitched. Oh, for heaven's sake, it's just a chair. The word just landed like thunder. I looked around the table, meeting eyes one by one. Sometimes the things we call just are the things that define our humanity, I said softly. Nobody moved. Even the candles seemed to hold their flame still. David looked at me, then at his wife. Tracy, why would you hide her chair? Her voice rose, desperate now. I didn't hide it. I was trying to make the room perfect. I didn't want people feeling sorry for her. For me? I asked, gently. Or for you? The words weren't loud, but they carried. Every guest heard them. Tracy's mouth opened, then closed. Colour drained from her cheeks. I leaned forward slightly, hands folded on the table. You know, dear, pride is a tricky companion. It makes us forget that dignity doesn't come from what others see. It comes from what we refuse to hide. The room stayed silent. Tracy's hand trembled. Her glass slipped. It hit the table with a small thud, wine spilling across the white cloth like a wound spreading fast. She tried to catch it, but in her haste, the stem snapped. A small, sharp sound, like something breaking inside her. She gasped and stepped back, but her heel caught the edge of the rug. The room turned to slow motion. Her body tilted. The glass shattered. And then, she fell. Right there, in front of everyone. The thud was heavier than it should have been, her knees hitting the floor hard. Gasps filled the air. David stood, rushing to her side, but she waved him off, face flushed red, tears mixing with the shock. For a moment, no one spoke. Not a word. Then she looked up at me, eyes wide, breath trembling, and in them I saw it, not anger, not shame, but revelation. She whispered, barely audible, I'm sorry. I didn't move. I didn't gloat. I just whispered back, Grace has a funny way of teaching manners, doesn't it? The guests stayed frozen, unsure whether to help her or to pray. Finally, I turned to the woman beside me and said softly, Would you pass the napkins, dear? Looks like we've spilled more than wine tonight. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel. It was nervous. The kind that knows truth just entered the room and doesn't know where to sit. I took a slow sip of my water, feeling the burn of quiet justice go down smooth. Because grace doesn't shout. It arrives quietly, lets pride trip on its own steps, and then kneels beside it. Not to mock, but to teach. And that night, Grace was teaching her well. For a few heartbeats, no one breathed. The party, the music, the chatter, the clinking of glass, all froze in mid-air. Only the faint hum of the chandelier remained, like time holding its breath. Tracy knelt on the polished floor, her red gown spread around her like a collapsed flame. Wine glistened beside her hand, a dark stain creeping across the white cloth. And in that crimson spill, I saw everything she'd been trying to hide. Fear, pride, exhaustion, guilt. David reached for her shoulder. Honey, are you? I'm fine, she whispered, voice cracking. She wasn't. The guests shifted uneasily, eyes darting between us. No one dared move first. A woman whispered, Should we help her up? Someone else murmured, Maybe just give her a second. I stayed seated, still as stone. I wasn't waiting for apology. I was waiting for truth to settle where pride had fallen. Finally, Tracy looked up at me. Her mascara had streaked, her lipstick smudged. There was no perfection left. Just a woman seeing herself for the first time. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, voice trembling. I nodded. I know, but you did. She swallowed hard. I thought if people saw the chair, They'd feel sorry for us, for me. I wanted tonight to be beautiful. I smiled faintly. It still is, dear, just not the way you planned. She blinked, tears pooling again. Everyone's staring. Then let them learn something, I said softly. The silence deepened. It wasn't cruel. It was cleansing. The kind that follows a confession. Even the air seemed lighter, as though the house itself exhaled. David helped her to her feet, his hand gentle, his face unreadable. He looked at me once, eyes full of questions he wasn't ready to ask. I gave him a small nod, letting him know there was still love under the disappointment. Tracy stood unsteady, dabbing at her dress with a napkin. "I'll clean this," she murmured, voice small. "Sit down," I said. "Let the moment do the cleaning." A few guests chuckled nervously, relieved at the sound of my calm voice. Tracy obeyed, sinking into the chair beside David, her hands folded tight. The room found its breath again. Someone refilled a glass. The pianist, unsure, touched a single key. Soft, hesitant, like forgiveness testing its legs. I turned to the table, smiling gently. "It's all right, everyone. Accidents remind us we're still human." A ripple of quiet laughter spread. People resumed eating, slower now, subdued, as though each of them had tasted a truth they couldn't untaste. Across the table, Tracy stared down at her lap. Her shoulders shook once, a tiny shiver of surrender. I leaned toward her, voice low enough for her alone. "Grace doesn't humiliate, dear, it humbles. What you feel right now isn't punishment, it's clarity." She nodded, tears slipping quietly down her cheek. I looked around the table, faces softened, tension fading. Even the candles seemed warmer again. The performance had ended. Now the healing could begin. A guest across from me smiled shyly. "Mrs. Wheeler, that was powerful." I shook my head. "No, child. That was just honesty arriving late." The conversation picked up again, lighter now, but different, as if the house had changed its heartbeat. Tracy reached for her water, her fingers trembling, and whispered, "I'm sorry, truly." I placed my hand over hers, fragile skin over fragile pride. "Apologies are seeds, dear. Let's see what you grow from this one." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time there was no defense in them, only recognition. After dessert, guests began to leave, their goodbyes softer than their hellos. They hugged me longer, patted my hand, avoided meeting Tracy's eyes. One woman whispered, "You've raised the standard for grace tonight." I smiled faintly. Grace raises itself. When the door finally closed behind the last guest, the house fell silent again. The kind of silence that carries both ache and relief. David busied himself stacking plates, pretending not to look at either of us. Tracy sat across from me, staring at the empty wine glass in front of her. I broke the quiet first. "You can stop pretending, dear. The world already forgave you." She looked up, confused. "Why? After what I did?" "Because forgiveness isn't earned," I said. "It's given before it's deserved. That's what makes it holy." Her lip quivered. "I don't deserve yours." I smiled softly. "That's the point." We sat there, the two of us, surrounded by the remnants of her perfect evening. Plates half-eaten, candles melting into shadows, the faint scent of spilled wine in the air. Outside, the wind shifted, rustling the trees like applause from heaven. In that stillness, I whispered to myself, "Walter, it's done. Grace has done her work." The clock struck midnight, clean, final, merciful. The day that began with absence ended with presence, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something settle inside me, not revenge, not victory, but peace wearing the face of justice. Because when silence finally speaks, the truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be heard. That night, when the last dish was washed and the guests had gone, the house sat heavy in its silence. No more music, no more laughter, just the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of an old home remembering what it had witnessed. I wheeled myself slowly to my room. The air still smelled faintly of wine and perfume, the scent of pride and apology sharing the same space. As I passed the hallway mirror, I caught my reflection and paused. For the first time, I didn't see weakness looking back. I saw a woman who'd been tested and hadn't lost her softness. "Walter," I whispered, "you'd have been proud of me tonight." I didn't raise my voice once. His picture sat on the dresser, same as it had for years. A smile frozen in time, eyes that always seemed to know more than they should. I wheeled closer, reaching out to trace the frame. "You always said grace wins in the end," I murmured, "but you never told me how much it costs." The night outside was still. The moon poured through the curtains, silver and forgiving. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then fell quiet. Even the world seemed thoughtful. I folded my hands and prayed softly, not out of duty, but out of need. "Lord, thank you for showing me that silence can speak louder than pride. And thank you for holding me steady when my heart wanted to break." Tears slipped down my cheeks. They weren't from sadness. They were from release. The kind that comes when you realize the fight is over, and you've survived with your dignity intact. A soft knock interrupted my prayer. "Come in," I said. The door opened slowly, and Tracy stood there, her face bare, her eyes swollen. She wasn't wearing her armor anymore, just a simple robe and remorse. "May I?" she whispered. I nodded. "Of course." She stepped inside, hesitant, like she was walking into a church. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands twisting in her lap. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing myself on that floor." I said nothing. Sometimes silence is the only mirror worth offering. "I didn't mean for things to go so far," she continued. I thought if I could control everything, I wouldn't feel so small." There it was, the truth, trembling and raw. I reached for her hand. It was cold, shaking. "Tracy," I said gently, "you don't have to control what love already covers." Her lip quivered. "I made you look helpless in front of everyone." I shook my head. "No, dear. You showed them what grace looks like when it refuses to hide." She broke then, shoulders trembling, tears spilling freely. "I've been so cruel to you," she said between sobs. "I thought you judged me. I thought you looked down on me because I wasn't enough." "Enough for what?" I asked softly. "For him. For this family. For this house." I squeezed her hand. "You've been enough for all of it. You just forgot that you didn't need perfection to belong." She pressed a hand to her mouth, crying harder now. "I don't deserve your kindness." I smiled sadly. Neither did I when Walter married me. But he gave it anyway. That's how love works. It's not a wage. It's a gift. We sat there in the dark, the only light the moon spilling across the floor like mercy made visible. After a while, she whispered, "I'll bring your wheelchair back first thing in the morning." I nodded. "No rush. Let it return when your heart's ready too." She looked at me, eyes shining through the tears. "I don't know how to face you tomorrow." I smiled softly. "Face me the same way you should face God, honest and unafraid." Tracy covered her face with her hands and exhaled. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the door. "Thank you," she said. "Not for forgiving me, for seeing me when I didn't deserve it." When she left, the room felt warmer, lighter. I turned back toward Walter's photo. "Did you hear that, love?" I whispered. "Your son's wife finally met herself tonight." The clock ticked past midnight. I tilted my head back and closed my eyes. Outside, the first hint of dawn began to press against the horizon, faint, shy, like Grace returning for a second shift. I thought about all the women who'd ever been hidden for someone else's comfort. How many of them had smiled through small humiliations, telling themselves, "It's just one more thing to forgive." Maybe tonight, one of them would sleep easier, knowing Grace still wins. I whispered my final prayer, before drifting off, my voice faint but certain. "Lord, if the lesson is over, let the healing begin." And as I fell asleep, I swear I felt Walter's warmth near me, not as memory, but as peace. Because when you live long enough, you learn something simple and sacred. The loudest miracles always happen in silence. I woke before the sun. The air in my room was still cool, carrying that early quiet only mornings understand, the kind that feels like forgiveness wrapped in light. For a moment, I lay there listening to the small sounds of a house that had finally exhaled. The night had taken something with it, the pride, the pretending, the performance. And what it left behind felt like truth. I turned toward the window, and the first golden thread of sunrise slipped through the curtains, resting across my blanket. It looked like a promise. Not loud, just steady. Then I saw it, right where it belonged. My wheelchair. It sat in the corner near the dresser, polished clean, sunlight glinting softly off its armrest. Someone had not only returned it, but wiped every trace of dust away. There was a small folded note resting on the seat cushion. I wheeled closer, my heart already knowing who it was from. In Tracy's careful handwriting, it read, "Forgiveness doesn't erase what I did, but maybe it can rewrite what I'll become." I held the note in my hand for a long moment. It wasn't long or poetic. But it was enough. The kind of enough that heals quietly, like a wound closing under sunlight. I placed the note on my dresser, beside Walter's photo. "Looks like she's learning," I whispered. And in that moment, I didn't feel old or forgotten or small. I felt seen. By heaven, by memory, by the woman I'd chosen to be. When I wheeled out into the hallway, the scent of breakfast surprised me. Coffee, eggs, and something else. Cinnamon. Tracy's attempt at my old recipe. In the kitchen, she stood in her robe, hair tied up, eyes tired, but soft. "Morning," she said quietly. "I thought you might like something warm." I smiled. "You read my mind." She gestured toward the table. "Sit where you like." The words carried weight, the same words she'd once never needed to say. I wheeled to the table and rested my hands in my lap. The chair creaked faintly, familiar, comfortable, mine. Tracy set a plate in front of me. The toast was uneven, the eggs slightly burned, but it looked like redemption on a dish. "I know it's not perfect," she said. "Perfect is overrated," I said with a smile. "Sincerity's rarer." She chuckled softly, looking down at her hands. "You make forgiveness look easy." I shook my head. "It's not. But it's lighter to carry than bitterness." She nodded slowly. "Last night, when everyone left, I felt like the whole world was staring through me. I wanted to disappear." I sipped my coffee. "That was Grace showing you what pride feels like from the outside." She took that in quietly. "You think God still sees me kindly?" "He never stopped," I said. You just turned off the light for a while. She smiled faintly, tears rising again. I don't know how to thank you. Live better, I said gently. That'll be enough. We ate mostly in silence after that. Not the tense kind, the comfortable kind, the kind that comes after two storms have finally drifted past each other. At one point, David wandered in, hair still messy from sleep. He looked between us, uncertain. Morning, he said cautiously. Morning, son, I replied, smiling. Your wife makes a decent breakfast when she's not hosting galas. Tracy laughed quietly, blushing. I'm learning. David looked from her to me, realization dawning across his face. He stepped forward and kissed the top of my head. Thank you, Mum. For what? I asked. For not giving up on us. I reached up and patted his hand. That's what mothers do, son. We pray louder than disappointment. He nodded, his eyes glistening. Then he turned and kissed Tracy's forehead. She looked at him with something new, humility softened by love. As they talked quietly over coffee, I looked out the window again. The sunlight had filled the yard now, touching every leaf, every shadow. The roses I'd planted months ago glowed in the early light, red, full, alive. I whispered a small thank you, not to anyone in particular, just to the day itself for starting so gently after such a hard night. After breakfast, Tracy gathered the dishes, and I told her to leave them. Go sit with your husband, I said. I'll clean up. She hesitated. You shouldn't. I smiled. Grace works best when it moves. She laughed softly, understanding. Okay. When they left the room, I rolled to the sink, humming a tune I hadn't sung in years. The sound surprised me, bright, alive, almost youthful. It struck me then that healing doesn't arrive as one grand moment. It sneaks in through mornings like this, a note on a chair, a plate of burnt toast, a silence that no longer hurts. I looked down at my hands, aged but steady, and whispered, You did good, Martha. You did real good. The light through the window warmed my face, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't just feel alive, I felt free. 2 days later, the knock came just as I'd settled with my tea. It was late afternoon, that quiet hour when the light turns honey-coloured and the world pauses to think. Come in, I called, expecting David or Tracy. Instead, a familiar face peeked through the door. Mrs. Wheeler? It took me a moment, but then I saw her. The wide eyes, the gentle smile, the same dimple that used to flash whenever she finally solved an algebra problem. Angela? I gasped. Lord, I haven't seen you since you graduated. She laughed, stepping inside with the careful excitement of someone returning home. 32 years, she said, shaking her head. You haven't changed a bit. I chuckled. Flattery that bold should come with a gift. She grinned and held up a box. Banana bread. Still your favourite, right? I smiled wide. You remembered. As she unpacked it on the table, I took her in, older now, with faint lines of wisdom around her eyes. There was something about her presence that felt timely, almost divine. What brings you here, child? I asked. She hesitated, brushing a crumb from the box. You might not remember, but I used to live just a few blocks away. My aunt goes to your church now. She told me about what happened at the party. I raised an eyebrow, half amused. News travels faster than mercy, I see. Angela laughed softly. She didn't tell it like gossip. She said she'd witnessed Grace walk into a room. I blinked. She said that? She did, and I wanted to see it for myself. She sat across from me, her eyes searching my face. You always told us that dignity is the quietest kind of strength. I never understood it until now. I sipped my tea, letting her words soak into the air between us. Well, I said gently, Sometimes the quiet lessons take the longest to hear. She nodded. I think that's why I came. I've been struggling with my own mother-in-law. We don't see eye to eye. And I keep thinking about how you handled that night. Not fighting, not shouting, just standing firm in who you are. I smiled. Oh, I didn't stand firm, dear. I sat firm. She laughed, shaking her head. You know what I mean. I leaned forward. Angela, grace isn't weakness. It's choosing peace when your pride is begging for war. You can win arguments and still lose people. But if you choose truth wrapped in kindness, that kind never loses. Her eyes glistened. That's what I needed to hear. We sat quietly for a while, the clock ticking in rhythm with our thoughts. Then she said softly, You taught me how to write essays. But that night, you taught the whole town how to live. Her words took me by surprise. My throat tightened. Child, I whispered, I didn't do anything grand. I just didn't hide when someone tried to erase me. That's exactly why it mattered, she said. You showed us that forgiveness doesn't erase the wound, it just keeps it from becoming poison. I stared at her, humbled by the reflection. Maybe that's what time does. It sends your lessons back to you through other mouths, just to make sure you've learned them too. When she stood to leave, she hugged me tightly. You know, she said, people talk about you like you're a story. The woman who didn't shout, but changed a room. I smiled against her shoulder. Stories don't belong to storytellers, Angela. They belong to listeners. You take it now. Tell it right. She nodded, eyes bright. I will. After she left, I sat for a long while, staring at the door. The house felt lighter again, not empty, just blessedly quiet. The banana bread scent mingled with the smell of old wood and sun-warmed curtains. I turned to Walter's photo and whispered, You see, love, the echo's begun. The phone rang then, a soft, old-fashioned ring that broke the stillness. When I picked it up, it was the church secretary. Mrs. Wheeler, Pastor Raymond heard about your story. He was wondering if you'd speak at the women's circle next week. Maybe share whatever lesson you think God was teaching you. I smiled. Tell him I'll come, but I won't bring notes. Grace doesn't need a script. She laughed warmly. I'll let him know. After I hung up, I looked at my hands, old but steady. The same hands that once graded papers, stirred soups, folded laundry, and held on through heartbreak. Hands that had finally kned what they were made for, not control, not judgment, but release. Outside, the wind brushed through the trees, scattering petals across the porch. I whispered, You hear that, Walter? The story's walking on its own now. And for the first time in years, I felt completely at rest. Not because everyone had learned their lesson, but because I had. Grace doesn't end with forgiveness. It keeps travelling quietly through the people it touches. And that day, it had already begun its next journey, carried on the heart of a woman I once taught to write her name. The invitation came folded in cream paper, sealed with the church's gold emblem. It wasn't fancy, just a simple note from Pastor Raymond written in his neat, looping handwriting. Mrs. Wheeler, the women's circle would be honoured to hear your story next Thursday evening. Your grace has been a sermon all its own. With respect, R. I smiled when I read it. All my life, I'd been the one teaching lessons, spelling tests, essays, manners. Now life had made me the lesson. I placed the letter beside my teacup and stared out the window. The afternoon sun was soft that day, like it was listening. In the yard, Tracy was watering the roses, humming quietly. It struck me. How much could change without a single speech or argument? Sometimes all you have to do is stand still long enough for others to catch up to the truth. That evening, Tracy came in from the garden with her gloves still damp. "Mrs. Wheeler," she said, "I heard the church invited you to speak. That's wonderful." I smiled. "They want me to talk about the night you fell." She froze mid-step, then exhaled with a small laugh. "Oh, Lord, that story's everywhere, isn't it?" I chuckled. Apparently Grace travels faster than gossip. She laughed too, wiping her forehead. "Do you know what you'll say?" "I might just let the spirit write it," I said softly. She nodded. "Then it'll be perfect." I looked at her closely. Her face carried something new. Not guilt, not fear. Just humility, peaceful and steady. Healing had made her beautiful in a way pride never could. "Tracy," I said gently, "how are you really?" She leaned against the counter, thinking. Lighter, like something heavy finally rolled off my chest. "Good," I said. "That's what repentance feels like. Weight that turns into wings." Her eyes glistened. "You really think God's forgiven me?" I smiled. "He forgave you before you fell. The fall just made you ready to listen." That made her cry softly, but she didn't hide it this time. She just said, "Thank you," and left the room quietly, the way peace leaves, softly, after finishing its work. Later that night, I sat by my window with the invitation in my lap. The stars were scattered like old memories, each one holding a piece of something I'd once prayed for. I thought about the years, the lessons taught, the losses survived, the loneliness carried. And I realized something simple. Grace isn't just what saved me that night. It's what's been saving me my whole life. From bitterness, from silence, from smallness. I whispered to Walter's photo. "You remember when I said I'd never speak in front of a crowd again? Looks like God had other plans." The next morning, I asked Tracy to help me pick out a dress for the church event. She looked delighted. "Oh, I'd love to." We spent an hour in my room, fabric spread across the bed, laughter filling the air. She chose a deep lavender one, the same colour I'd worn at her birthday dinner. "Redemption shade," she said with a grin. I laughed. "You might be a poet after all." When she left, I stared at the dress for a long while. It wasn't just fabric, it was full circle. Later, I sat down at my writing desk, opened a fresh page, and began to jot a few lines. Not a script, not a speech, just a prayer disguised as a plan. "If I tell them anything," I wrote, "let it be this, that grace doesn't arrive with thunder, it whispers through humiliation. That forgiveness doesn't erase pain, it transforms it into purpose. And that dignity isn't pride, it's the soul remembering its worth." I read the words aloud to myself, slowly, letting them settle in my bones. Then I folded the paper and slipped it into my purse. Not because I needed it, but because carrying it felt like holding truth in my pocket. That evening, David came home with flowers, daisies, my favourite. "For next Thursday," he said, smiling, "your big sermon." I laughed. "It's not a sermon, son, it's just a story." He shook his head. "No, Mom, it's a miracle told in English." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from worry, from gratitude. Because somewhere between the chair being hidden and the note being left, something inside me had been restored. It wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about the simple, powerful truth that God can turn any humiliation into a hymn if you're brave enough to let Him finish the song. So I whispered into the quiet, "Lord, let me speak softly and honestly. And if one woman hears you instead of me, that'll be enough." The wind outside moved the curtains, soft and slow. And I swear, if Grace had breath, it sighed right then, like it was saying, "It already will." The church hall smelled faintly of lemon polish and old hymnals, a scent that always reminded me of beginnings. Rows of folding chairs were neatly arranged, each one waiting for someone who needed to hear what I hadn't planned to say. Tracy helped wheel me up to the small platform near the pulpit. "Are you sure you don't want me to stay?" she asked softly. I smiled. "No, dear. You've already stayed through the hardest part." She nodded, her eyes tender. "Then I'll be waiting in the back when you're done." The women's circle filled quickly, old friends, familiar faces, a few strangers with eyes that already glistened. Pastor Raymond opened the meeting with a short prayer, then turned to me with a kind smile. "Mrs. Wheeler," he said, "we all know part of your story, but we'd be honored if you'd tell us the rest, in your own words." I nodded, folding my hands in my lap. When I began to speak, my voice came out steady, not rehearsed, not fragile, just true. "Good evening, everyone," I said. "I suppose you've all heard what happened at that dinner. You might have heard that my daughter-in-law hid my wheelchair before her birthday party, and you probably heard she fell to her knees in front of everyone that same night." A soft murmur rippled through the room. Sympathy, surprise, understanding. "Well," I continued, "I'm not here to tell you about humiliation. I'm here to tell you about grace, the kind that hides inside hurt until the right moment." The room quieted completely. I could feel every heart leaning closer. "When I woke that morning and found my chair gone, I felt erased," I said, "not because I couldn't move, but because someone had decided I didn't fit her version of beauty. But sometimes when people try to hide you, they end up revealing themselves." A few women nodded, tears already in their eyes. "I could have shouted. I could have made a scene," I said. "But Grace told me to wait, to let truth do its own walking, and when it finally did, it came softly, but it came strong." I paused, remembering that moment, the broken glass, the silence, the look in Tracy's eyes. "It wasn't revenge that made her fall," I said gently. "It was realization. And when she looked up, I saw her for the first time, not as the woman who hurt me, but as a woman who didn't know how to love without control." Someone sniffled in the back row. Another woman reached for her friend's hand. I smiled softly. Grace isn't a halo. It's a decision, to stay kind when cruelty would have been easier, to keep your voice calm when the world expects you to break. The words seemed to travel on their own. I could feel them land, on wounds, on regrets, on years of silence sitting in that room. "Some of you," I said, "have chairs people have tried to hide. Maybe not with wheels. Maybe it's your opinions, your worth, your truth. You've been asked to shrink so someone else can shine, and you've stayed quiet to keep the peace." Heads nodded. The air grew thicker, sacred. "But peace built on silence isn't peace," I said, leaning forward. "It's fear, with a pretty dress on. Real peace comes when you stop apologizing for taking up space." The room went still again, the kind of still that feels like prayer. I glanced toward the back and saw Tracy standing in the doorway, her hand pressed over her mouth, tears running freely down her face. I smiled at her, small and knowing. Sometimes grace circles back. It returns to the place it began, just to show you it didn't leave empty-handed. I looked back to the audience. That night didn't end with anger. It ended with forgiveness, because I realized something simple. The fall wasn't her punishment. It was her awakening. And my silence wasn't weakness. It was strength dressed as patience. A few women clapped softly, Pastor Raymond wiped at his glasses. God doesn't always rescue us from humiliation, I said. Sometimes he lets us walk through it so we can show others what surviving with dignity looks like. I took a breath and smiled. So, if you ever find yourself hidden, remember, what they take from sight, God brings into light. Applause began gently, then grew, not loud or showy, but heartfelt. Women stood, one by one, their eyes glistening. Some came forward to hug me, others just whispered, "Thank you." When the crowd began to thin, Tracy walked down the aisle slowly, her face still streaked with tears. She knelt beside my chair, the same way she had that night, but this time there was no shame in it. "Martha," she whispered, "I didn't just hear your story. I felt it." I touched her cheek. "Good. That means grace did its job." We stayed like that for a moment. Her kneeling, me sitting. Two women who had once been enemies, now joined by the quiet power of truth told kindly. Later, as the sun dipped behind the stained glass windows, Pastor Raymond came to me. "That was more than a testimony," he said softly. "That was healing, disguised as storytelling." I smiled. "Isn't that what faith is?" When I rolled outside, the evening air felt sweet, the kind that tastes like closure. The church bell rang once, long and low, now, as if marking an ending that was also a beginning. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "See, Walter?" The truth found its way home, and for a moment, the wind lifted just enough to brush against my face. Not a gust, not a chill, just a whisper. Almost like an answer. Peace has a sound, and it isn't silence. It's the steady rhythm of breath that doesn't rush anymore. It's the whisper of wind against curtains that don't tremble from anger but sway in contentment. It's the sound of life continuing, not loudly, but faithfully. Weeks passed after that night at the church. The story had settled like dust after a long storm. Quiet, visible, undeniable. I could feel it in how people greeted me differently, not with pity, but with respect. Tracy, too, had changed. She moved slower, softer, the sharpness gone, replaced by thoughtfulness. She'd stop by my room in the mornings, bringing tea or flowers from the garden. Once she said, "I still feel ashamed when I think about that night." I told her, "Shame fades when you start walking in the opposite direction." And she smiled, small but real. David was happier too. I think peace in a house restores the men as much as the women. He'd come home from work humming again, that same tune Walter used to hum when life was good. The house finally sounded like family again. One quiet morning, I sat by the window, my favourite sermon spot, and began writing in my old lesson planner. The cover was worn smooth by years of chalk dust and coffee stains. It had held hundreds of lessons in neat little rows, but today I wanted to write just one more, not for students, but for myself. I titled the page, "The Last Lesson." Then I wrote, 1. The loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest. Grace doesn't forget. It transforms remembering into wisdom. 3. Forgiveness is not an emotion. It's a decision you renew every morning. Dignity is what remains when everything else has been taken. 4. And love, true love, is not agreement. It's endurance wrapped in kindness. When I finished, I read the words aloud and felt something settle deep in my chest. Not pride, not satisfaction, just stillness. The key. And you feel when you finally know the story isn't unfinished anymore. Later that day, Tracy knocked on my door. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Always," I said. She entered holding a small envelope. "This came for you," she said. Inside was another letter from the school district. They were dedicating a library wing in my name, the Martha L. Wheeler Learning Center. My eyes filled before I could stop them. "Tracy," I whispered, "I taught 30 years. I thought the world had forgotten." She smiled. "It didn't. It was just waiting for you to teach one more lesson." I laughed softly through my tears. Seems even heaven respects good timing. The dedication ceremony was modest but lovely. Former students came, now grown, with children of their own. Some brought flowers, others stories. One man, tall and greying, hugged me and said, "You gave me detention 3 times. Best thing that ever happened to me." I smiled. Grace comes in strange packages. When the plaque was revealed, the crowd clapped, but I just looked at the words and thought, God, you really don't waste anything, do you? Back home, I placed the program on the mantel beside Walter's photograph. It looked right there, his face and that paper side by side. Legacy and love sharing the same frame. That evening, Tracy came in quietly. She'd been crying, not from sorrow, but something softer. "You were remarkable today," she said. "I just told the truth," I said. "People like hearing it when it's wrapped in humility." She smiled. "You make it sound so simple." "It's simple," I said, "just not easy." She sat beside me, folding her hands. "I think I've spent my whole life trying to be seen. But you taught me that being true is better." I reached over, placing my hand on hers. "Child, being seen fades with applause. Being true lasts when the room's empty." We sat there together, watching the last bit of sunlight slip across the garden. The roses glowed faintly in the dusk, the same ones she'd watered that morning. After she went to bed, I stayed up, watching the stars. They looked closer than usual, as if heaven had leaned down to listen. I thought about Walter, about the years behind me, about the way Grace had followed me like a patient friend. I whispered, "I think I understand now. Every humiliation you allowed was an invitation. Every silence was a seed. Every fall, mine, hers, anyone's, was just a doorway to light." The wind shifted outside, carrying the scent of roses through the open window. It brushed across my face, cool, kind, eternal. And that's when I realized this was the real reward. Not the applause, not the plaque, not even the forgiveness. It was peace, the kind that doesn't ask for explanation. The kind that sits quietly beside you and says, "You did enough." I closed the planner and whispered, "Lesson complete." And in the stillness that followed, I heard it, the faint creak of the old house settling, like it was sighing in relief. I smiled. Because maybe it wasn't just the house. Maybe it was my soul. They say time heals all wounds. But I've learned time doesn't heal, it reveals. It peels back the noise until all that's left is truth. It's been months since that night, the party, the fall, the silence, the forgiveness. And in that time, life has gone on in the sweetest, simplest ways. Tracy still hums in the kitchen every morning. David still brings me daisies every Friday. And the roses in the garden, the ones watered with tears, pride and prayer, bloom stronger than they ever did. Some days I watch the neighborhood from my porch. Children run by with scraped knees and wild laughter. Old friends wave from across the street. And I sit there, tea in hand, feeling the peace that doesn't need applause. I think often about that night. Not to relive it, but to remember what Grace looked like wearing my face. I once believed forgiveness was about weakness, a polite way of stepping aside. Now I know it's the opposite. Forgiveness is standing your ground without raising your hand. It's the power to stay still while the storm runs out of breath. Sometimes I wonder what people say about me now. Maybe they call me the woman whose daughter-in-law hid her wheelchair. Maybe they say I'm the one who didn't shout but changed a room anyway. I don't mind either version. Both are true. I keep that old planner by my bedside. Every night before I sleep, I run my fingers across the page titled The Last Lesson. The words are fading a little now, but their meaning grows clearer. Because every day since, life has tested them, and they've held firm. One morning, the mailman brought another envelope. No plaque this time, no invitation, just a letter from a woman in another town. She wrote, "I watched your story on YouTube. My daughter and I hadn't spoken in years, but after hearing you say grace doesn't humiliate, it humbles, I called her. We talked for hours. Thank you for giving. US, a way back to love." I held that letter to my chest and cried. Not sad tears, just the kind that wash the soul clean. Because that's when it hit me. Stories don't end when the credits roll. They keep walking, through voices, through hearts, through the small acts of courage they inspire. That night I went out to the porch. The sky was clear, the stars countless. I looked up and whispered, "Walter." It worked. The story kept going. The wind stirred the curtains behind me, soft and approving. And I knew he'd heard. So now, every evening, I sit here watching the world fade into twilight, and I talk to whoever will listen. Sometimes it's the wind, sometimes it's you. Because if you're hearing my voice right now, there's something you were meant to remember. Maybe you've been hidden by someone else's pride. Maybe your worth has been misplaced, or your name spoken without kindness. Maybe you've been quiet so long you've forgotten the sound of your own strength. Then listen close, child. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You don't need revenge to be free. And you don't need perfection to be worthy of love. Grace already knows your name. It's been walking beside you, waiting for the moment you stop trying to earn what was already yours. So when they try to hide your chair, your truth, your story, your voice, don't fight to be seen. Just wait. Because grace will find you in the silence. It always does. And when it does, stand tall, or sit tall if that's your way, and say quietly, "I am still here." And I am not ashamed of the way I rise. Because rising doesn't always mean standing. Sometimes it simply means refusing to bow. The camera could fade out there, a woman on her porch, the evening light soft around her, her eyes lifted toward heaven. But if you listen closely, before the music swells, you'll hear her final whisper. This is Martha Wheeler. If my story reached you tonight, leave me a message below. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me what grace means to you. I want to know how far it traveled. The wind catches her voice, carrying it past the garden, past the roses, into the open night. And somewhere, maybe in another town, another heart, a quiet voice answers. It reached me, Martha. It reached me.